Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Stats All Day with Dr. O'Day. Today we're going to learn how to run a paired sample or repeated measures t-test in JAMOVI. So what I'm going to be comparing in this particular analysis is people's perceptions of individual freedom with regard to COVID-19, so thinking that people should be able to make their own choices, or support for governmental intervention with regard to COVID-19. Now, one thing that I'll say before I even get started running this stat is we shouldn't interpret this actual statistic. I'm using this as an example because it's timely, people can understand what's going on here, and because it's just interesting. However, one thing to keep in mind is that these two things were measured on with using slightly different items. Generally, if you're going to run a repeated measures t-test, you need to have the same thing that participants are responding to at each of the two time points or for each of the two things. I did not do that in this case, and I wasn't anticipating ever running this particular statistic. However, for the purposes of this video, it'll work just fine. So in JAMOVI, we're going to come up to t-test, and we're going to run a paired samples t-test. So JAMOVI is going to give you this little section over here, in which case you're telling it which of your variables you're pairing together. So the first one is going to be individual freedom, which I'm putting on the left side of this little divider, and then I have people's support for governmental intervention. I want to decide whether I'm making a specific hypothesis about this difference. So this first one is just saying that our alternative hypothesis is that those two things are significantly different from one another. We don't predict a specific direction. However, if we had a specific prediction based on previous research or theory that maybe individual freedom might be higher than governmental intervention, then I could click the second one and run that as a one-sided t-test. However, I don't have specific predictions here, so I'm just going to run it as a two-tailed t-test. So we also want to ask for a measure of effect size. That's going to give us Cohen's d, and a confidence interval, which is going to tell us what the extent to which we are 95% confident that the real difference between these two time points is going to fall within that 95% confidence interval. And then we want to ask for our descriptive statistics. So over here on the right, it has run the analysis for us. I'm going to start with our descriptive statistics. So this first line corresponds to the extent to which participants believe that people should be able to make their own decisions, and we found that participants reported an average of 5.93 with a standard deviation of 1.83 on that scale. Now, in this analysis, we're comparing that 5.93 to participants' perceptions of governmental intervention. And we see that the mean for governmental intervention is 4.81 with a standard deviation of 2.58. So participants are reporting at least a little bit higher values for support for individual freedom than governmental intervention, and we can see now whether that is significant or not. So up here is our T statistic. The way that T works, the way that all of our statistics work, is that there is some measure of the size of the effect divided by the general error around that effect. Now, as our test statistic increases, our p-value is going to simultaneously be decreasing. Once our t-statistic gets above about 2 to 2.5, that's when these values start to become significant. And so we're seeing that our t-statistic with 232 degrees of freedom is equal to 5.20. Now, because I said that we tend to get excited when our t-values are getting above about 2 to 2.5, we're thinking that this is probably going to be significant. To know if it's significant, we're going to come over to this p-value. And the way that you decide if this is significant or not is if it's less than 0.05. And what we're seeing here is that our p-value is less than 0.05. In fact, it's less than 0.001, in which case some people might describe this as highly significant. I'd probably just say that it's a significant difference. So what we're going to conclude here is that participants have significantly greater support for individual freedom than they do for governmental intervention, and we can actually also see a 95% confidence interval for that difference. Now, the null hypothesis is predicting that the difference between these scores is 0. However, what we're seeing here is that we are 95% confident that the actual difference between these two means is going to fall somewhere between 0.70, rounding up to 0.70, and 1.55, and we are 95% confident that the real population difference is going to fall somewhere between those values. This also gives us Cohen's d, which tells us how many standard deviations one of those values is than the other. Typically, about a medium effect size of Cohen's d is going to be somewhere around 0.4, 0.5, and above. So this is a small to medium effect size of 0.34, telling us that participants' perceptions of and support for individual freedom is significantly higher than governmental intervention, and it's specifically the size of that effect is 0.34 standard deviations higher. So I hope you learned something. If you have any questions, let me know. Have a great rest of your day.